I think that community gardens are this beautiful, beautiful way to connect communities in an urban area to food.
I think there's many, many ways that community gardens can contribute to more just, resilient, equitable cities. I mean, in many ways, they are a model. They are a garden. They are a sanctuary. They are a place where we produce.
Access to urban gardens is necessary because it provides holistically what people need in order to be happy.
I think there's many reasons that they're important. One is that they change the landscape of a city neighborhood.
Most of us don't have green space, right? Like we live in tiny apartments where there's not a lawn or a front yard or even a patio, a place where we can get sun. And so this is a way for us to be outside. And I think it's really, really important, especially in urban spaces. Not only does it help contribute to lowering climate temperatures, but I think it gives us all something to do and a place to be that we otherwise wouldn't be able to afford access to.
Well, it's certainly beneficial for us to look at and breathe the air and be out and working in them as opposed to being on the concrete jungle.
During COVID, the community gardens, as many people saw in the news and things, they just everyone in the world was like, oh my God, growing food, we should do that. We should make sourdough bread. We should do these things. We should go out and play in the streets. We should do these things. So when we're faced as a society with these external threats that silo us and divide us, we just have a natural inclination to go out and connect with other people. So we want to model that, not in a pandemic, not in a crisis, but just as an everyday thing.
My name is Sage Carbone. I am an East Cambridge resident. I am a community gardener. I'm a member of the Northern Narragansett Indian Tribe of Rhode Island. I became familiar with urban gardening in Boston soon after I moved to the Fenway neighborhood. It really helped me to understand some of the challenges that come with urban gardening and sharing space and land use.
I'm Meredith Thompson, and this is my husband, Gene Thompson.
You ever heard the song, the only two things that money can't buy is true love and homegrown tomatoes?
Yeah.
I think there's something really primal about growing stuff. So going through the patterns of digging up the earth and getting rid of the old weeds and choosing plants.
Here's one beautiful dahlia.
Here's a tasty one, Meredith.
Ooh, yum.
We are not meant to be in boxes, going from place to place in another box. We are meant to be barefoot, out in the woods, really enjoying what nature has to offer. And I see urban gardening and urban rewilding as a way for every one of us to be able to reconnect with what's important.
I'm Katie Ireland. I am the Cambridge Community Garden Coordinator or Liaison. So I connect the 14 community gardens in Cambridge to the city. I've always loved gardening. I grew up with a garden in my backyard and it was hugely important to me. I didn't realize how important it was until I didn't have it anymore. I grew up just picking cherry tomatoes off of the garden and going to play and just loving that was something that I got to do all the time. I loved gardening. I hated weeding, but I loved planting and I loved watering. And then my family had to move into an apartment when I was around in middle school. And I lost that and lost the connection to fresh food, and we weren't able to really do that anymore. And it really shaped how I feel about food and growing and having a connection to that. And so in my adult life, it's been really important to me to connect people to locally grown fresh food and to understand where food comes from.
My name is Stephen Nutter. I'm the Executive Director of Green Cambridge. Somebody had their backyard that they wanted to do something with because they didn't really do anything with it. That was our first farm and it was our first place. A few years later, we got this space that I'm in now, which is the Riverside Press Park. I think it's really important to not just have intentional spaces around building community, but unintentional and informal spaces around building community. Because I think we can all say that when we have to do something, it becomes a chore. But when it's just part of our lives, then it's just how we live. And that's a really good way, I think, to build and change culture and connect people back together. So, you know, that's a lot of weight to put on a little communal garden to here, but that's our sort of bigger picture goals and visions that we're looking for here.
I'm Julian Adjuman. I'm Professor of Urban and Environmental Policy and Planning at Tufts University. I work on a range of issues related to just and sustainable cities. And one part of that is my interest in urban agriculture, community gardening, growth spaces, social spaces. Now I'm more interested in the social aspects of community gardens. A lot of people think, as do I, that the main contribution of urban agriculture and community gardening, not the only, but the main contribution, is in community building and mobilization of communities. In these community gardens, we have what's called spaces of engagement, places where we can meet people who are different from us. And the importance of this is what's called contact theory. The more contact you have with people who are different from you, the more likely you are to be understanding, empathetic, treat other people with dignity.
I am Dimple Patel, and I joined the community garden in 2022. So we're in the Berkeley Community Garden. We're in the South End. This is, I think, the biggest community garden in the South End. So the one really special thing about our garden is that there are a lot of Chinese immigrant gardeners here, and they garden and grow things that are from their childhoods and their homes in China, and they grow squashes and all these like beautiful cabbages and spinaches, and it's just something that really made me connect to the garden, but also the people here. Helen, my neighbor, she feels like my surrogate mom here because she's always making sure I'm eating, and she shares what she grows and I share what I grow with her. And I feel like we check in on each other, and if we haven't seen each other in a while, we're asking about each other. And I just think that is the beautiful thing about community gardening, is it really brings people together that otherwise would not have had an opportunity to know each other.
My name is Betsy Feldman. I have been a gardener here for probably 13 years. I've always had a garden, whether I was in the suburbs or in the city, but this is my first formal urban garden. I just remember being so fascinated going to my grandmother's garden. It was in Ohio. My grandfather, before you'd have dinner, he'd go out and you could go with him and he'd pick the corn that we were going to have for dinner. And it was, to me, just so fascinating that you could do that. I didn't grow up there, but it was certainly part of my life. It's peaceful, it makes you feel productive. I also think it's a feeling of success, you know, putting something in the ground and nurturing it and then having it come up and, you know, get something out of it.
I had just moved here to the South End and was looking for a way to get connected to my community. I've always really wanted to have a community garden plot, and so I started calling all the community gardens in our neighborhood, and all of them had, 4 or 5 year wait lists. Some of them said we really prefer people to own a home in the area in order to garden in our plot, and then I found this garden, and they had a lottery system, and so I went to the lottery, which is in March, and everybody puts their names in like a bag and draws them, and I was the last name drawn, so I was the last person to get a plot. And that is how I got connected to gardening, and it's just been a lifeline for me, and it's been really exciting to get to meet people in my community and see them in the neighborhood now and like know who they are, and it just has really grounded me to really loving living in Boston. I knew if I want a plot in the garden here in the lottery, I would grow a ton of tomatoes. And so that is what I do. I grow a lot of different heirloom varieties. Sometimes if I'm at a restaurant and I eat a really good tomato, like I'll save the seeds because you literally can save the seeds, soak them in water for a couple of days, and then like you can grow that tomato plant. That's just how tomatoes work.
How the food gets to you is invisible in the way that we've set up modern grocery stores and restaurants and everything. Like, we do not think about how the food is made and where it comes from. And I think that even switching that to understand, oh yeah, like this carrot came from somewhere, and it came from the ground, and then it was sent somewhere, and then I bought it from the grocery store, and I've never even thought about that. Like, baby carrots are full-size carrots that we shred into baby sizes. No one thinks about that, but that's crazy. And I think that understanding that this food had like a whole life before it arrived at your doorstep can help you understand how to change like how much is being emitted, and can help us restructure our food system.
Our two granddaughters were very excited about being a part of that, and would go regularly. And one of our granddaughters loves cherry tomatoes, so that was her reward. The other one, not so much, but it was an important part for several years of their growing up and our being a part of their life.
Now, as I think back, I'm really glad. I feel like we did a good job introducing both our kids and their kids to growing, to the earth, to how does their food get produced. And I think they'll be conscious of that in a way that most people who haven't had a chance to grow things and to have pushy grandparents who actually got them involved.
I think it's important to have an understanding of all of these different aspects of how people access food in every different type of area, like urban or rural or suburban, in order to make effective change. And so that's kind of what I want to do with my life, which is why I really have valued having this experience in the community gardens, especially because it is different from urban gardening just in your backyard in a, third floor walk up or whatever. It's like, this is people growing together, and that is a very different experience than what anything I've ever experienced in my life.
I think that the very act of growing and producing together in communities is a very, very important one, and especially when these community gardens occur in what might be called food deserts, and that's a problematic term for a lot of reasons, but in those areas, community gardens can really start to move the needle on food injustice and start to provide nutritional and culturally appropriate foods.
The gardeners, a lot of them brought seeds from their home, like from their homeland with them that they wanted to grow here. And that is what their big drive was to grow things that they couldn't get in the stores here because they were special squashes or vegetables from their home. And that is very much something my parents did growing up. We come from a part of India that is really a large farming community. And so when they moved to the US, they also brought seeds, and we would do, we lived in an apartment complex, so my mom would find ways to just grow things in the little small green spaces she could find where she knew the sun would be just right. She would try to grow a little okra, or some of the different beans that we eat in India, because you just couldn't find those in the grocery stores in like the 80s and the 90s. And so that's kind of how gardening started for me. It was a way to grow things that my parents could not find here in the US. And anytime my mom would go to India, she'd always come back with seeds.
Why community gardening is so amazing is that it's like this land is a public resource that people can access, instead of having it be a private thing where it's like, well, I can't afford to buy a house in Cambridge that has a backyard that I can grow on, but we have this here for people and they don't need to buy their own land, and it's free. And I think that's just like so magical.
The pandemic provided some of that opportunity and free time for me, where I ended up spending quite a number of my days helping to maintain community garden spaces. And also, I became a co-founder of a group called Cambridge City Growers. We also began relationships with different landowners to transform some of those underutilized spaces into growing healthy foods. There's no question that my Indigenous background and experiences are deeply engaged with the community work that I do and that Cambridge City Growers does.
We live in a community where more than 60% of the people are renters, meaning that they don't have agency over their space. Our country is founded on property rights, and property rights always win. And when you don't have agency over your space, studies have found that there's a disconnection into the civic engagement as well. And so then we lose those voices as well in the political process. And so then the political process gets distorted to those who already have wealth and power and because they own land, or at least have agency over land. So by having a communal space, we can bring people in who may not have a place to grow or may not have agency over the space, and they can feel that they have agency over this whole space.
I think we don't have enough because, when I was calling and trying to find a plot in a community garden, people were telling me, oh, well, we have a 4-year wait list. Like, good luck. Like, you kind of have to be grandfathered into our garden. It just made me realize, like, there isn't enough green space accessible for people to just even have a place to sit sometimes, right? So my hope is that we can start thinking differently about unused land or land, even just small pieces of land where we could grow, pollinator gardens to help the bees and butterflies out. Like, there's just a lot of different small things we can do.
If you're in a place where you don't have community gardens set up, all of these were started with individuals asking. This property was owned by Squirrel Brand Candy Company back in like the 70s or something, and they had this empty, unused plot, and people just went and they asked to use it, and they said, hey, can we garden here? You're not using it. And that's how that came to be. And then when the building was sold, they petitioned the city government to buy the land and also to buy the building, which is now affordable housing. So that's how this community garden came to be, and that's how most of the other ones in Cambridge happened. And that's how I would say you can start community gardens, is to just ask the city, say, hey, no one's using this, can we use it? And they might say yes.
What do we wish for people coming along for the next generation? I would say it would be to have as wonderful as experience as we have had between being part of nature, growing things, being in awe of certain plants, and being part of a community that supports and helps one another.
When I think about the next generation, I would say just jump in. Hang in there too, because the first year, 2, 3 are not necessarily the most enjoyable. You become more devoted and attached to the garden. You learn stuff. We're still learning after 40 plus years.
What we loved overall about the garden is the diversity of the gardens. Every garden is different, and that is just so delightful.